They thought I was just the quiet girl in the corner, the one who poured coffee and stayed out of the way. For 10 years, I let them believe it. What they didn't know was that I was secretly building a business empire powerful enough to bring their legacy to its knees. And the moment they walked into my boardroom, everything changed. Let me tell you how I flipped the game without ever raising my voice. The Whitmore family's annual reunion was every bit as stifling as I remembered. Aunt Evelyn's palatial mansion was dressed in all its over-the-top glory, gold chandeliers, marble floors, and walls covered in oil paintings of people who looked nothing like us. The smell of overpriced perfume, expensive scotch, and superiority filled the air like an invisible fog. I stood quietly by the fireplace, my simple black dress acting like armor in a battlefield of wealth and judgment. Cousins laughed too loudly, bragging about stock options and luxury vacations, hoping to outshine one another under the spotlight of family approval. Nobody noticed the quiet one in the corner, the secretary in modest heels with a champagne flute held like a shield. I didn't need attention. I'd learned to use invisibility as cover. I sipped slowly, watching, calculating, remembering every insult dressed as small talk. Then came the inevitable voice that could slice through any moment with the elegance of a dagger. Aunt Evelyn. "Oh, Madeline," she called, already smirking. "I almost didn't see you. Still working as a secretary, dear." I turned and smiled behind the glass, letting her enjoy her illusion of power. "Administrative assistant, actually," I said evenly, keeping my tone light, pleasant, forgettable. She raised a perfectly sculpted brow and took a sip from her flute like she just tasted something sour. "Still at that tiny little startup summit something?" she asked, loud enough for nearby cousins to hear. "Summit Solutions," I replied, just loud enough to be polite, not enough to invite further questions. Garrett, my cousin and the newly anointed partner at Whitmore Stein, turned from the bar with the grin of someone who believed in hand-me-down power. "Mad, seriously, I could get you a real job, one with actual career potential," he offered, as if tossing me a bone. I thought about the 7-figure contract I had signed just yesterday and the 20-person team I now led, but I simply said, "I'm happy where I am." They chuckled among themselves, shaking their heads, completely unaware they were laughing in the presence of the CEO they'd tried to outmaneuver last quarter. "Happy?" Aunt Evelyn repeated, practically sneering. "Darling, your cousins are running companies, flying private, managing portfolios, and you're still pushing papers for someone else. If only they knew the truth behind that little someone else." Because the truth was, I was the someone else. I'd been hiding in plain sight for a decade, building an empire right under their noses. The real story began 10 years ago in this very house, at another reunion just like this one. I had shown up fresh out of Wharton, full of fire and foolish hope. I had an MBA, a business plan, and a bold vision for turning around struggling companies with surgical precision. I pitched it to my family, hoping for support, maybe even a little respect. Uncle Vincent laughed so hard he spilled bourbon on the rug. Barking, consulting. "Leave that to the big dog, sweetheart." And just like that, my idea was dismissed along with my ambition. They told me to join the family business, start in the mailroom like the men had, though none of them ever had. What they really meant was know your place, be grateful, marry rich if you can. The Whitmore empire had no room for a female heir with ideas. That night, I made 2 decisions that would change my life. First, I would build something of my own, completely independent from their legacy. Second, I would never ask for their help again, and one day, I'd make them regret ever brushing me off. So I found a shabby office above a Chinese takeout on Halsey Street and paid rent with what little I had. The name on the door was Summit Solutions, but no one knew who ran it. And that was intentional. My first client was a flailing manufacturing company nobody else wanted to touch. I worked 14-hour days, fixing supply chains, rebuilding morale, and renegotiating debt until we brought them back to life. 6 months later, they were thriving, and word began to spread quietly. Executives began whispering about a mysterious firm that did what the big consultancies couldn't. I hired slow and carefully, choosing people who shared my values and my secrecy. Everyone signed NDAs, and I never appeared in public-facing documents. I didn't care about fame, only power and results. I played the long game while my family continued to underestimate me year after year. The irony, the Whitmores built their fortune by acquiring broken companies on the cheap. My firm specialized in saving those same companies before the Whitmores could pounce. We weren't just growing, we were quietly blocking their acquisitions at every turn, and they never knew I was the one standing in their way. Even as Summit grew into 12 cities with Fortune 500 clients and a 94% turnaround rate, I maintained the facade. I kept the old apartment office, used decoy job titles, and even answered phones when I knew relatives might drop by. They never looked twice at the quiet assistant with the coffee tray. It was the perfect camouflage. Last night, Aunt Evelyn's sharp tongue had returned to familiar territory. "I hear your uncle's latest acquisition isn't going smoothly," I said, feigning innocence. "Carter Sons, right?" Her brush tightened for just a second, the first crack in a carefully painted mask. There have been complications, she admitted with a brittle smile, but Vincent's handling it. What she didn't know was that those complications were named Summit Solutions and me. Carter's sons had reached out in secret 3 months ago, desperate to escape a Whitmore hostile takeover. We rebuilt their systems, doubled their valuation, and quietly spiked the deal. Garrett muttered something about consultants being all talk and no follow-through, and I almost laughed. He had no idea our fee for saving Carter was more than his annual salary. Which firm was it again? He asked, wrinkling his nose. Summit, whatever. I didn't answer, letting him dig his own hole. Right then, my phone buzzed in, my clutch a message from Jordan, my assistant, urgent, Whitmore Holdings, requesting meeting rare, Carter Sons merger -9AA. My heart pounded, but my expression didn't change. They were coming to me and they had no clue. Everything okay? Aunt Evelyn asked, watching me carefully. Just peachy, I smiled. Actually, I've got an early meeting tomorrow. Oh, for someone important, something like that. The next morning, I stood inside the private elevator of Summit Solutions headquarters, 34 floors above the noise of the city. Gone was the modest black dress from the reunion. Today, I wore a deep navy chenille suit, tailored sharp and silent like a blade. It wasn't just a power outfit, it was a declaration of war. Jordan, my assistant, waited outside the elevator doors with her usual calm professionalism and a hint of mischief in her smile. Your uncle and his team arrived early, she said, handing me the agenda. They've been waiting in the conference room for 20 minutes, and your aunt has already complained about the lack of coffee service. I didn't hide my smirk. This was going to be satisfying. Let them wait a little longer, I said, checking the time, 8:57 a.m. Are the Carter Sons executives inside? Yes, Jordan confirmed. They've taken their seats quietly, but your cousin Garrett insisted on personally handling the legal side of the deal. How thoughtful, I said, smoothing my sleeve. And who else from the Whitmore circus came along? Jordan scrolled down the guest list. Aunt Evelyn is in attendance. Not officially, of course, she's just there for moral support. I nodded once. Have they been offered refreshments? Your aunt asked twice, she said, barely containing her grin. I told them the administrative assistant would be in shortly. That made me pause, then laugh softly, poetic justice brewing like fresh coffee. I glanced into the mirror panel beside the door and checked my reflection one last time. The woman staring back wasn't the quiet girl from 10 years ago who begged her family to believe in her. This was a woman forged in silence, raised by rejection, and sharpened by experience. I was ready. The hallway outside the conference room felt longer than usual, lined with portraits of business titans, most of them men, most of them forgotten. I could hear the faint hum of voices through the heavy double doors, Garrett's confident tone, Uncle Vincent's booming authority, and Aunt Evelyn's affected laughter. They were in there scheming, unaware of the avalanche coming. I took a deep breath and nodded to Jordan. She opened the doors and the room went dead silent. My uncle sat at the head of the table, shoulders wide with assumed dominance, flanked by Garrett and my other cousin, Nathan, who managed the family's finance arm. Across from them, Carter Sons CEO, Mr. Harrington, sat stiffly, clearly out of place among the Whitmore's self-congratulatory energy. Aunt Evelyn's perched to the side, flipping through her phone with bored elegance. Not one of them looked up until I stepped inside. If you find these stories inspiring and they motivate you to take action, please comment 9. If not, comment 0. Your feedback means a lot to us. Thank you for your valuable time. Finally, Evelyn huffed without lifting her gaze. I assume you've brought coffee. Then her eyes met mine and froze. Madeline, what are you wearing? I walked calmly across the room and took the seat at the opposite head of the table, directly across from Uncle Vincent. I don't serve coffee anymore. Aunt Evelyn. In fact, I never really did. I opened the Summit Solutions folder and glanced at the merger terms with practiced ease. Uncle Vincent frowned, confused. Where's this? Where's the CEO of Summit Solutions? We were promised a meeting with the actual decision maker. I leaned forward slightly, hands folded. You have one. I'm the CEO of Summit Solutions and have been for the past 10 years. For a moment, there was only silence so sharp it could cut glass. Garrett's mouth opened, then closed like a fish struggling on dry land. Nathan dropped his pen, eyes darting to the door as if escape were still possible. Aunt Evelyn's face cracked for the first time in years. Vincent recovered with a scowl. This is ridiculous. You're a secretary, Madeline. You always have been. I gave him a look so steady it forced him to blink. No. That was a cover, an extremely effective one. None of you ever looked close enough to notice. Jordan entered at that moment, carrying a stack of contracts and distributing them like ceremonial daggers. She moved silently, efficiently, then stepped behind me without a word. I watched as my family flipped through the documents with growing unease. These are the proposed merger terms, I explained, under which Summit Solutions would consider allowing Whitmore Holdings to partner with Carter Sons. Consider? Garrett blurted out, "You can't be serious. This is a joke, right?" I tapped my tablet, and the wall behind me lit up with a live projection: Summit's financials, growth stats, asset portfolio. Summit Solutions currently manages over $122 billion in client assets. I said coolly, "We've led 80 successful restructures in the past 3 years alone with an industry-leading turnaround rate. Carter Sons hired us not because of desperation, but because your tactics nearly destroyed them. And now our approval is required for any merger to proceed." Garrett's jaw tightened, his voice rising. "That can't be. You're playing some game. This is blackmail." "It's business," I corrected, "the kind you taught me I'd never be good enough to handle." Mr. Harrington cleared his throat awkwardly. "I can confirm everything she said. Summit Solutions saved our company from collapse after Whitmore's aggressive acquisition tactics nearly bankrupted us." He looked at my family, then back at me. "Their restructuring plan increased our profits by 47% in less than a quarter." Nathan was pale now, flipping through the documents like he could rewrite reality with enough page turns. "Wait, what about Peterson Electronics?" I held up one finger. "Saved them 6 months ago." "Maritime Freight, that was us too. The Davidson Group, also us." I leaned forward slightly, letting the silence return. "For 10 years, I've been the reason your acquisitions kept slipping away. Every time you tried to cannibalize a company, Summit got there first. And you never saw it coming because you never looked at me twice." Uncle Vincent's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You deliberately sabotaged our business." "That's treason, Madeline." "No," I said evenly. "That's karma." Garrett stood up, puffing his chest. "I'm calling our legal team." "Sit down, Garrett," I said firmly. He hesitated, then obeyed because I wasn't asking. "You really should read the contract in front of you. The one your firm spent weeks trying to secure." Jordan handed over a second folder, this one labeled confidential. "That's a summary of our current financial position," I said. "Summit now holds enough liquidity to begin purchasing a controlling interest in Whitmore Holdings if necessary." The room erupted into chaos. Aunt Evelyn began breathing heavily, fingers trembling. Nathan scrambled to check the figures on his tablet. Garrett sank back into his chair, speechless. Uncle Vincent stood like a statue, refusing to accept the reality collapsing around him. "This is blackmail," he said again, quieter this time. "This is a takeover," I replied. "And you taught me how to do it." I rose slowly, smoothing my jacket. "You have until 5 p.m. today to review the merger terms. They're generous, all things considered." I paused at the door, glancing back one last time. "Oh, and Aunt Evelyn." I smiled sweetly. "That champagne you offered me last night, I own the vineyard now." I turned the handle and walked out without waiting for their response. The hours that followed the boardroom reveal were a whirlwind of chaos, denial, and desperate damage control. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls and texts from cousins suddenly acting like old friends, from board members scrambling to adjust, and from Aunt Evelyn trying to schedule a quick lunch. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on the one thing that had driven me for 10 years, taking control on my own terms. By noon, the Whitmore Holdings board had called an emergency vote. The older members, those who cared more about numbers than pride, understood immediately where this was going. Vincent's stronghold began to crumble under the weight of my firm's numbers and the undeniable truth. At 3:42 p.m., they accepted Summit's merger proposal in full. The official announcement hit the media by 4 p.m., and by 4:05, headlines were everywhere. Secret CEO behind billion-dollar empire, unmasked Whitmore family shocked. My assistant Jordan stepped into my office, holding a folder and a coffee from our own chain, grinning ear to ear. "He's here," she said simply. I nodded without looking up. Of course, Uncle Vincent would come personally. He barged in a moment later, rage smoldering under his carefully combed hair and tailored jacket. "You betrayed this family," he spat, pacing in front of my desk like a man searching for control he no longer had. "You humiliated us publicly, made a mockery of everything we built." I waited until he finally ran out of words and stared at me. Then I looked up, calm and composed. "Actually, I learned from this family." I stood slowly, my presence filling the room in a way it never had before. "Isn't this exactly what you taught us? Seize power, eliminate competition, never show weakness." He opened his mouth, but I kept going. "You gave me nothing, Vincent, less than nothing. You told me I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong in boardrooms or corner offices." I walked around the desk and faced him directly. "So, I built something better without you." He sank into one of the visitor chairs, looking decades older than he had that morning. "Why now?" he muttered. "You could have stayed in the shadows forever. Why expose yourself?" I sighed and crossed my arms, the weight of 10 silent years heavy in my chest. "Because it was time," I said. "You're not just targeting Carter Sons anymore. You've got your eyes on Thomson Electronics, Maritime Solutions, and 3 others who deserve better than being gutted by your greed. I handed him a folder Jordan had prepared that morning. Summit will acquire controlling interest in Whitmore Holdings and restructure it starting with its values. He opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning the pages in silence. You thought of everything, he whispered. I always thought you were too soft, too careful to play in this world. I smiled without warmth. I wasn't too soft, I was too smart to play your game by your rules. I gave him one final choice. You can stay on as a consultant if you're willing to support the company's new mission. And if I'm not, he asked bitterly. Your exit package is on page 3, I said. Consider it generous because I don't need you. After he left, Jordan entered with a stack of newspapers and a knowing look. Summit's reveal had already gone viral, picked up by every major business outlet. From secretary to CEO, the billion-dollar woman the Whitmores never saw coming. Comments flooded in from every corner of the internet, many from women who'd once been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. That night, I received a single text that meant more than any headline. It was from my mother, who had divorced into the Whitmore family and distanced herself from their poison years ago. Her message read, I always knew you'd show them. I stared at the screen, tears burning behind my eyes, but this time they came from pride. In the weeks that followed, Summit's restructuring of Whitmore Holdings began in full force. Departments were overhauled, ethics standards raised, and acquisitions reviewed with actual integrity. Some longtime executives left voluntarily, unable to adjust to the shift in values. Others stayed, eager to finally work for a company led by principle instead of ego. Evelyn tried to rewrite the narrative in the press, calling it a beautiful story of legacy and redemption. She told one reporter, we always knew Madeline had potential, the Whitmore spirit lives in her. I responded by releasing footage from the last reunion where she spent 20 minutes explaining to everyone why I would never amount to anything. The clip went viral and Evelyn stopped giving interviews. Garrett wasn't so lucky either. He tried to spin things his way, claiming he'd been in on the secret the entire time. Unfortunately, too many people had seen the color drain from his face in that boardroom. Within a month, his firm's biggest clients pulled out and he was granted a leave of absence. The only one who handled it well was Nathan. 2 weeks after the takeover, he invited me to lunch with a sheepish proposal. If we joined forces, we'd dominate the market, he said, trying to smile. I declined, letting him down easy. Summit wasn't built to dominate, it was built to elevate. But the real rewards came in quieter moments. A young intern stopped me in the hallway, nearly in tears, and whispered, "Thank you for showing me I don't have to act small to belong." Female CEOs from across the country reached out with their own war stories, their own battles for recognition. And business schools began inviting me to speak not just about growth, but about ethics and strategy with heart. 3 months later, I stood on stage at the National Business Innovation Awards. My name echoed through the auditorium as I accepted the top honor, the audience rising to their feet in a standing ovation. In the front row sat my mother, eyes brimming with pride, and behind her 3 former assistants from my secretary years. They had all gone on to leadership roles within Summit. In my acceptance speech, I looked out over the crowd and said, "Success isn't about who shouts the loudest, it's about who builds something that lasts when no one is watching." I told them how I had played a role for 10 years so the world would underestimate me, how I used that invisibility to build power the right way with strategy and patience. The applause thundered, but I knew the real victory happened long before that stage. Later that evening, Jordan walked into my office with a sly smile. "You'll want to see this," she said, handing me a letter. It was Uncle Vincent's official resignation with a handwritten note at the bottom. It read, "My niece taught me that true business success isn't about acquisitions, it's about impact. I regret that it took losing everything to learn this lesson." I folded the letter, staring out the window at the city below, alive with opportunity and consequence. The next Whitmore family reunion, I planned to host it myself, right in Summit's main conference room, the very place where I'd once served coffee, invisible and underestimated. This time I'd be at the head of the table, and everyone would know exactly who I was. Jordan knocked on the door. "Your 4 o'clock is here, the CEO of Thomson Electronics." I turned to face the future with a smile. "Send them in and bring coffee, the good stuff, from our chain." As I stood, I caught my reflection in the glass, confident, calm, and no longer hiding. I'd built something extraordinary, not in spite of the people who doubted me, but because of them. They taught me to play small, and I used it to win big. That's not revenge, that's justice. There will be moments in life when you're underestimated, when people look right through you, dismiss your ideas, and make you feel invisible. But don't let their limited vision define your worth. In fact, being overlooked can be your greatest advantage because it gives you the space to build something powerful in silence without the pressure. without the noise. Madeline didn't need applause to begin. She didn't wait for anyone's approval to chase her vision. She built quietly, strategically, and with relentless focus because real power isn't loud. It's what you do when no one's watching, and it's the foundation you lay while others are too busy judging. This story is a reminder you don't need permission to succeed. You don't need validation to start. If they laugh at you, let them, that laughter. It's fuel. It means they'll never see you coming. Remember, lasting success isn't about proving people wrong, it's about proving yourself right. It's about staying aligned with your values, working with purpose, and never letting rejection rewrite your mission. Like Madeline, you don't need to walk into the room with applause. You walk in with preparation, clarity, and undeniable presence. So if you're in a place where people underestimate you, don't raise your voice, raise your game. Let their doubt become your drive. Let your silence become strength. And when your moment comes, don't just show up walking like the person they never saw coming, but will never forget. You don't need to stand out today. You just need the patience to build something so real, so undeniable that one day the world has no choice but to notice.